welcome back to another Warhammer Underworlds lore video. This time, we're going to be focusing on one of the newer warbands coming out in Wave 2, Night Vault. Today we're talking about Ylthari's Guardians. And I wanted to tackle them for a few reasons. They are a newer faction and look amazing, and their lore is included in the new Sylvaneth battle tome for Age of Sigmar, and that's been on my mind as I kind of finished that book recently with lore videos for that. So if you are interested in learning about the Sylvaneth as a whole, go ahead and check out the playlist that I have that covers all the Age of Sigmar lore for that army in the description down below. If you're not familiar with this army's lore in Age of Sigmar, the Sylvaneth are a deeply interesting faction in the Mortal Realms. No other army has a connection to the environment, the literal setting of the game, quite like them, because they really represent the realms fighting back, meaning that the setting itself, nature itself around all these big battles are happening, is no longer tolerating the war, the corruption, the spoiling, right? They take on this aspect of war just as the realms take on seasons to push back everyone else. They don't possess the raw physical might of the other races, nor do they kind of procreate as fast. It takes time. Lives are very sacred. And so the way they conduct themselves, the way they do warfare, is through guerrilla tactics, right? Hit and runs, no real all-out assaults, but it's a lot of being sneaky and hitting the enemy at the right place at the right time. This could be a quick assassination of a leader, it could be disrupting supply lines, it could be hitting a fortress but while the main army within it is actually out conquering, or acting as a distraction when working with allies. The Sylvaneth will come in one side, distract the enemy, and the real hammer units from their allies will come in the other direction. Basically, hitting the enemy hard by drawing them out and snapping them into a trap with expert precision. Now, one thing that's incredibly pertinent to this story is the life cycle of the Sylvaneth. They start their lives as something called a soul pod. The soil, it's literally a seed, the soil that the seed is put in directly affects their temperament and outlook. Which makes sense, right? If we put seeds in different kinds of grounds, it will affect the plant that grows. This soul pod or seed can grow into a variety of different kinds of Sylvaneth, the dryads, branch witches, tree lords, and so forth. When a Sylvaneth falls in battle or just by sheer age, the soul pod can be harvested from their body and planted anew, repeating the cycle. It's a sort of immortality, but not quite. It's a cycle of life, much like there's a cycle of seasons. They are, as a faction, a reflection of the realms themselves because they do take on the aspects of their environment. Again, literally, if you're planted in an area that has had a lot of bloodshed, you will be born as a Sylvaneth, very warlike in temperament, right? Their environment defines who they are. And so the question becomes, what happens when everything goes wrong with an environment, right? What if instead of this verdant garden and everything's great, your soul pod ended up in hell itself? And that is the story of Ylthari's Guardians. Now, if you're jumping into the series and you don't know about the video, The History of Shadespire, go watch it. I'll put it in the links down below. It's very important to understanding what the kind of state of Shadespire is. To put it super briefly, the city of Shadespire was ripped from reality. It kind of exists in Shyish, Realm of Death, but it's also in this weird prison space between light and shadow. And everything we've seen so far regarding the city has kind of been inside of its walls, right? The Fire Slayers defending it, the Grots waking up inside of it, but the Sylvaneth are a little bit different. Before Shadespire was a cursed place, just outside of the city walls was a small forest, and in that forest was a soul pod grove, i.e. a bunch of soul pods planted in the ground that are ready to start birthing Sylvaneth. Now, the Sylvaneth who lived in that area lived in harmony with the Cataphragnes, the leaders of Shadespire, and they acted as emissaries of the Sylvaneth queen, Ylthari. And you wouldn't think that the goddess of life would make allies in the realm of death, but it was happening and things were really good. This is the Age of Myth, things are going well. Well, like everything else in this series, things changed dramatically when the city of Shadespire became cursed by Nagash. We learn that it wasn't just the city and everything in its walls that kind of felt the curse itself, but the entire region around it. The area was so saturated with death magic and became inhospitable and cursed land that there was no chance of anything growing out there anyway. Centuries passed of the city being in this weird prison state, and then the Necroquake happened. If you're not familiar with Age of Sigmar lore, the Necroquake was a large event where magic was destabilized everywhere. The curse that held Shadespire in kind of a shrouded mystery cracked and began to change. Now, as I mentioned in my Shadespire lore video, this change happened, and now everyone can see Shadespire. They all know it's there, the kind of the veneer has been worn off, and everyone can now tell what's inside of it to an extent. It's still a super hellish prison, but now people knew where it was and they wandered in. In addition to all of that happening, one small thing was almost unnoticed. A crack in the cage, so to speak, that allowed the slightest bits of life magic coming from Giran into the city. From that little twinkle of life, the long dormant soul pods just outside the walls began to stir with life again. But remember what we said before, the environment that a soul pod is raised in directly changes its temperament and personality. It shapes it. So take a quick guess, what kind of mind and value system is born out of a Shadespire, right? Dormant for generations, caught in a hellish prison without kind of living in this weird contradiction of logic and madness and light and dark, from dead earth, because it's from Shyish, with the screams of so many intruders kind of staining the ground. There's bloodshed everywhere. This place is a massacre site. Well, these kinds of Sylvaneth are what you get, Ylthari's Guardians. These are the first, but not necessarily the only, soul pods to awaken. And so you have Ylthari, Anslane the Revenant Archer, Galenhan the Glade, and Scothale. That's how I'm going to pronounce them. These are the first fruits of the tormented grove, born and raised in this prison. They are angry and wrathful, full of vigor and malice towards everyone. And they have exactly one mission: retrieve the other soul pods from their kin. As they were kind of gaining consciousness, they realized that when that Necroquake hit, not only did life magic pour in and give them life, but it also shook away all of the soul pods across Shadespire. So now they are venturing in to retrieve them, come back to the grove, and then when that's done, find a way out. Now, of course, that's a very short-sighted goal, but it is the first step, right? The idea is no man left behind. Get every single soul pod, and then we'll figure out how to evacuate later on. But given the nature of their environment and the unyielding nature of this curse on the city, this mission's going to take an extremely long time. But of course, with their cyclical nature, time means very little to them, and so they continue their quest, venturing into the city, collecting soul pods, killing anything that kind of gets in their way or they see, and bringing back their spoils to the grove outside the city wall. And friends, that's pretty much all there is about Ylthari's Guardians. They don't necessarily match up to existing units. Some of them do, for sure, but some of them are a little bit more customized, have a little bit more flavor than some of the existing models in the Age of Sigmar range. But their lore fits very well into the Sylvaneth lore as a whole in terms of how they are produced, how their environment has changed them and how they interact with their environment, how they value their own species above all else, right? And no man left behind is kind of a very Sylvaneth thing compared to some of the other races that exist in the mortal realms. And while there isn't a whole lot of lore for them specifically outside of their origin story, they are nonetheless an extremely cool part of the setting of both Underworlds and Age of Sigmar. And so once again, if you do want to learn more about Sylvaneth, how they function on the battlefield, as well as learning more about their god Alariel, who is a very integral part of that army, go ahead and check out the playlist down below. Thank you all so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming.